I've known many people to walk away from a reenactment and they all say that this has given us a totally different outlook on the United States history. I think all of the reenactors, including myself, would like to tell the public what it was really like during the Civil War rather than Hollywood's version, the way it was portrayed from both sides. You know how Hollywood always makes the South look like the bad guys, the North as victims. But there's a lot more to it than just that. I represent a real brigadier general that existed in the Civil War, and his name was James Henry Lane. General Lane was a professor at the Virginia Military Institute, teaching ethics and tactics. My wife, Marilyn Lane, belongs to the civilian reenactors, and she portrays my wife, Charlotte Lane, in those days. I do research on eBay, and I write directly to a lot of the museums of history in the South. I became involved in reenactments through my mailman, and it's been about 5 years. He was a lieutenant, and he delivered the mail one day and said, "Why don't you join up?" And I said, "Join up for what?" "The Confederacy." And I said, "Well, I thought the war was over with." Well, as you see, it's not.
If you're going to do a reenactment, you need General Lee. We're just trying to portray the man of the past. And I'm doing research as we go. And I'm having a lot of help from the other reenactors. Uniforms, you can buy them from the sutlers. Mine, I ordered in March. It came in Friday. Looks good to me.
Most of the costumes you see are bought by sutlers that specialize in making men's and women's clothing. Most of the women's clothing you see here are made by the women themselves after a lot of studying and research. So they're very accurate also.
Really scandalous.
In the real Civil War, each side had hundreds of horse-drawn ambulances. They had no springs, had no beds or anything. They just lay the real wounded soldiers right on the flatbed of the wagon. A lot of them died because of the jerking and stuff like that.
In the 1800s, ambulance drivers were considered neutral. I like to pretend that I'm neutral and that they won't shoot at me, but even here in the reenactments, I've had people turn their guns on me after I've been picking up the other side's enemy for a while. Then they decide that there's quite enough of that, and now it's time for me to get out of there and stop rescuing people. So I'm sure that it happened just like that. Chaz rescues off-the-track standardbreds that were just too slow, and so we can put them back into harness using a new job. The horses do wonderfully on the battlefield. Getting them off the racetrack means that they're broke to crowds, they're broke to strollers and crazy umbrellas and balloons flying all over the place. So once they get to a reenactment, it's not that difficult. What I experienced today on the ambulance is probably very similar to what I would have experienced in the 1800s. The horses don't necessarily know that it is not real, so that feeling of floating down the field at a full gallop because the horses are borderline out of control, that's very typical of probably what the people back then felt.
There have been times when the audience comes up to us afterwards and asks us, "Are you firing real cannonballs?" And we say that's the whole idea, is to simulate that effect. So we do a choreography as a cannon going off and its result across the field.
Right before the camp opens up to spectators, all of us try to get in the atmosphere of a real camp during the Civil War. We hide everything that might look modern, and we try to portray and act like it's really happening now. Being a reenactor today has been very rewarding for me, and anybody that comes to these reenactments always generally go away with a different attitude of what it was like and how important it was. They walk away thinking, my God, this really did happen.